The handiest summary I can give of Ghostbusters Afterlife is that it's essentially the Joe Biden of Ghostbusters revival. A good enough, certainly better than nothing, intimately effective 80s nostalgia throwback, occasionally costumed confusingly in a second layer of nostalgia for the 1950s, coasting on earnestness for its own sake as its entire personality, and fairly or not, destined to be more successful than a previous candidate's attempt at the same task from 2016, mainly by virtue of not being a woman. That was a bit far to walk for a joke, but in my defense, it's probably better to get the how does it best compare to 2016's Ghostbusters Answer the Call issue out of the way right up front. Short answer, this is the better of the two, not by much, neither is particularly bad nor great, just in different respects, and also I felt the need to get at least some humor off, since a palpable lack thereof for long stretches of the film is the main place where it comes up short on its own merits and the merits of its aspirations, and the basic problem really does seem to come down to what's always been the problem with trying to build any kind of bigger franchise in terms of lore, narrative, mythos, etc. off an original film, where avoiding and mocking anything like that was the entire point. It's not just that Ghostbusters the original had more jokes than its various cartoon spin-offs or Afterlife does now, or simply better jokes than the 2016 reboot or its own official sequel did. It's that the whole Ghostbusters concept itself, starting with the exorcism but as pest control aesthetic, is meant to be a joke. The entire gag is to take all the pomp and spectacle of supernatural good versus evil, mythic unending battle against the cosmic forces of darkness for the fate of mankind, and just take the absolute piss out of it by having the good guys show up and it's not a wizard or chosen ones or even cool 50s macho adventure scientists, but instead just these four schlubby, dumpy assholes played by out-of-shape comedy writers, and they're just gonna suck the Dark Lord or whoever up into a shop vac and send the city a bill for it. I mean, that's really funny. Unfortunately, sometimes you tell a joke too well and people miss that it's a joke at all, specifically my entire generational cohort of now middle-aged 80s kids who thought Ghostbusters was a pretty cool movie that their dads really liked but really loved it as a better than it deserved to be cartoon advertising a bunch of licensed action figures, which led to said generational cohort mistakenly believing that Stripes vs. Poltergeist was something that we desperately needed to become a multimedia franchise and not just one very good movie. So now, after retroactively pretending to enjoy the sequel and getting embarrassingly angry about the remake, whatever many fans still believe they wanted this will get it, because Sony is basically desperate for at least one other thing that they own to become popular again so that all their jobs aren't totally dependent on Spider-Man leftovers, resulting in a pandemic-delayed would-be summer blockbuster turned pre-Thanksgiving, hopefully the current Marvel thing is done at number one by then, right? Release, that's, fine, honestly, it's fine, just like the last one was fine. If you want to split the Afterlife versus Answer the Call difference, it's the 2016 movie at least understood Ghostbusters is supposed to be an irreverent genre satire, with comedians being funny chasing ghosts around but needed a tighter script and better direction, whereas Afterlife is significantly better directed with a mostly tighter script and feels like a Ghostbusters sequel in all the strictly superficial ways in terms of hammering the music cues, returning monsters, sound effects, props, lines, shoutouts, and spoilery things that fans will be happy about, but also conducts itself as though it doesn't know the original was a comedy in the first place, or that the things it's referencing were never meant to be taken seriously. Which isn't necessarily the wrong approach, it's just kind of a strange experience watching something frame itself as the direct sequel to a comedy but aim for sincere, honestly bordering on maudlin by the ending sentimentality. You know, like if Field of Dreams were supposed to have been the sequel to Major League and like Charlie Sheen as Wild Thing Vaughn came out of the cornfield instead of Shoeless Joe, but it was otherwise the same movie. It's like both attempts only got half the formula. Now, to be certain, there is more than enough here in the setup to see where they decided they had the right idea this time. Again, solid script for not a bad movie. Ghostbusters eventually turned into a kids franchise, so how about Kid Ghostbusters and a small town instead of a big city to change it up? Sure, somebody already made that movie as Monster Squad, but this can be the official version. In any case, said small town is a rural mining outfit in the middle of nowhere where a cash-strapped single mom and two kids, one teenaged and angsty, one young and brainy, have come to settle the estate of her estranged deceased father, a local hermit whom the trailers and general premise have already informed you was actually one of the original Ghostbusters and apparently standing guard against a second incursion by original franchise villain Gozer set to occur in the area, so it now falls to the younger generation and some strategically diverse new local companions to figure out how and when that's going to happen, convince the adult that it's going on, and when that doesn't work, rediscover and work out how to use all the toys and licensed merchandise from the original movie so they can save the franchise world. And the thing is, whereas the aforementioned Monster Squad actually had most of the same irreverent, actually subversive, mischievous comedy sensibility that made original Ghostbusters appeal to actual kids in the first place, Afterlife is coming at this more from the J.J. Abrams Stranger Things imitation Spielberg school of kids movies that are actually for middle-aged adults, right down to nostalgic turducken of being deliberately a 1980s evoking style movie set in a rural town inexplicably still mired in 1950s aesthetics and featuring famously ageless Paul Rudd as a nearly superfluous grown-up character whose entire role is the guy who has to explain Ghostbusters and why it was awesome and why they should care about it to the actual child stars of the movie, even though they're supposed to be descendants of the Ghostbusters. Which, by the way, keeps feeling like it's going to pay off as a funny, introspective joke at the movie's expense, except, again, the movie keeps forgetting that it's a sequel to a comedy and is supposed to have jokes in it. On the plus side, once you do accept that, for whatever reason, a mostly straightforward kids' fantasy adventure movie inexplicably continuing the continuity of a comedy franchise is what we're doing here, as a mostly straightforward kids' fantasy adventure movie, it's actually pretty decent. Most of that you can put on the cast, or specifically McKenna Grace, who has the nominal lead as the smart, misunderstood kid who figures out what's going on and gets the eventual ghostbusting happening. It could have been a thankless role. She has to be the exposition character, the exposition receiver, and the heroine, while the other characters shuffle stock positions in rotation depending on which version of the small-town kids' fantasy adventure layout each individual scene is working from at the moment, but she provides a solid anchor and honestly seems to have a better handle on her own character than the script sometimes does, occasionally owing to a weird say-it-without-saying-it dance that the dialogue keeps doing about her and her late grandfather maybe not being on the spectrum. And she has fun rapport with a same-age supporting character named Podcast, about whom a positive criticism I can give is that he's endearing enough that you eventually don't mind that they named the character Podcast. But yeah, to the degree it's possible to separate the weirdness of what it is and whether or not it should exist in the first place, and the increasingly uncomfortable levels of meta layering on top of one another in terms of the legacy, inheritance, revival, and reboot themes, from simply what it is, there's quite a bit to enjoy here, and if an actual young audience actually has any interest in watching it, and is able to do so without actual middle-aged fanboys talking their ears off about how much they're supposed to care about the Easter eggs and references to old movies and action figures, they'll probably have a pretty solid time with all the figuring out the weapons, fighting the bad guys, using the tool stuff that kicks in for the second half. I don't know that it actually answers its own main question of whether or not Ghostbusters needed to be revived as a franchise in 2021. At least one thing that Paul Rudd's presence serves to make me more sure than ever is the problem is that basically everyone in Hollywood who'd be really good at making new Ghostbusters movies is currently busy making Marvel movies. But I found it mostly agreeable, and some of the big spoilers that many have found overbearing or outright annoying, I eventually found either charming or earned, so give this one a 7 out of 10, but can we cool it on this for a while now?